Mercedes W14 has been revealed to the Formula One universe, and at first glance, it looked much more like the W13. But after taking a closer look, you will see that the W14 is jam-packed with impressive aerodynamic details. In today's video, let's take a look at the W14 from front to back, looking at all the design details and discuss on what they do and how they work, and if they are legal at certain places, according to the latest rules. Let's start by analyzing the front wing of the W14. In terms of design, both wings are very different, but in terms of aerodynamics, both these designs do the same. Let's start by taking a look at the front wing outboard. It seems though they have disconnected elements at this section of the front wing end plate, while having little stays at that place. For comparison, I have pulled up the front and side view of the W14 front wing, plus the side view of the W13 for evaluation. If you look at the W13 front wing, you can see that the elements have a sweep, which has allowed them to cut a very large portion of the rearing tip. The FIA for 2023 brought up a new set of rules which consist of complex set of planes, which basically meant that this design solution by Mercedes has been made illegal. Another rule the FIA has changed is this one, which says that the front wing profiles and the front wing end plate must transition smoothly and without breaks along the surfaces in that typicality volume. This rule change has allowed these discontinuities within the W14 front wing to be legal. No part can be let loose freely, which is why Mercedes has used these small stays to connect those discontinuities to the end plate, which makes this design completely legal. This design does pose a lot of aerodynamic potential for the W14. First, the gaps between the wing profiles and the end plates does allow air to flow through the gaps, creating powerful vorticities. The gaps between the wing profiles and the end plates allows for downwash. Therefore, the front wings from last year and this year may appear different, but both front wings do the same in terms of aerodynamics. One more thing to note in this area is this small downwashing vane, as the experts would call it. This downwashing vane will add a vortex in the direction same to other vortices, which will lead to a powerful vortex system. When you move to the main front wing, if you look closely at the center of both wings, you can see that the center of the W14 wing is more cranked, whereas the center of the W13 wing is more dropped down. The flap of the front wing also seems to be very smooth on the W14 when you compare with the W13. This change in aerodynamic perspective might allow Mercedes to play with how they're shedding vorticity, and I presume that Mercedes would make tweaks around this part with different flaps as the season progresses. Now, moving on to the floor details. Let's start with the mid-floor. First thing you would notice, which is actually interesting, is the cranked barge board layout and the floor strike layout. There exists one supporting vane for the cranked barge board on either side of the car, which is also cranked. This helps to shed vorticity along both cranked vanes, creating more outwash along the floor. When we look at this particular part, the vanes are cranked, I presume, to its maximum, which leads to increased vortex strength. The reason I think there exist two vanes is that the inward vane is present to support the turning of the vortex of the outward vane to make the airflow a bit more cleaner, while not compromising on overall strength, as both vanes will create vorticity, generating a greater strength vortex. If you move a bit back from the vanes, you would see the secondary scope, a tight one from the W14 floor edge. I assume it checks the legality box from the FIA. Mercedes is using a very aggressive design to maximize outwash, and it does make sense to do so. The W14 has side pods of small size. When you consider the rest of the grid, Mercedes is the only one following this unique concept. The W14 does not have the big side pods the other cars have in the grid. Big side pods do allow to push the tire wake, but the zero pods on the Mercedes is not capable of achieving the same performance. Hence, the use of maximum allowed by the regulation makes sense, as the W14 depends on these parts to help push the tire wake outboard. When you look at the floor edge of the car, this is the part which I believe is the most aggressive part of the entire W14. First, take a look at the hugely tall ramp on the floor edge. This ramp is present to take in the outwash provided by the mid-floor vanes, the side pods and some other bits in that area into upwash to the rear of the car. When you see this cut out from the floor edge, it's a massive piece which is missing, and I believe it is to create strong vorticity. And these vorticities will be pulled to the diffuser area. How it will happen from the floor edge, let me get to that when we start discussing about the side pods of the W14. Now, let's talk about the second version of the zero pods. From T-front, the top of the side pods appear to be more wider than the last year, and the bottom is a bit narrower than the top of the side pod. The side pods of the W14 is much wider on the rear of the car when you compare with the W13 side pods. This length and weight seems to be much similar to the likes of Ferrari's SF23, not in size, but in length. This design decision, according to what I believe, taken by the Mercedes engineers is purely for aerodynamic reasons. When you look at last year's W13, you can see a lot of floor being exposed, creating a heavy load due to the narrow side pod design. Most thought that this exposure was the reason to porpoising, but I am not a fan of that opinion personally. If you look at porpoising of the W13 in terms of aerodynamics, pressure above the floor cannot be higher than the pressure on the underfloor, considering the fact that most of the downforce is generated through the underfloor of these new ground effect Formula 1 cars. Next point people make is the floor stiffness, saying that the stiffness of the W13 floor is less, leading to porpoising. That also theoretically incorrect, considering the fact that a stay is in place to make the floor stiffer. So, the side pods will be out from the porpoising equation in this scenario. The real reason for the buffing up of the side pods is purely aerodynamic. Remember the vorticities we discussed created by the floor edges. Take that, and the tire wake we discussed earlier on into this explanation. There is an aerodynamic phenomenon where the outwashed airflow in the wake will be drawn from the point where the bodywork is drawn in. In the W13, it is from here, then the wake will act on the floor edge, messing the aerodynamics of the car. This is why Mercedes has lengthened the side pods more towards the back, which would mean the tire wake and the downwash created will be drawn into the diffuser area, which would mean much more clearer airflow around the car. It's not an entire redesign, but a slight tweak in the car aerodynamic philosophy. The other thing to note is that buffing up of the side pods will make cooling of the internals a bit more easier. Finally, let's talk about the bodywork. Bodywork on the top is bulky, the bodywork on the rear has a downwashing section onto the rear wing, a design similar to other cars on the grid. Another fact is that the W14 has less cooling louvers when compared with the W13. That could mean that Mercedes is moving towards more rear cooling rather than cooling through the louvers. Overall, I think the W14 has some pretty cool design features, and the engineers for sure have pushed the limits. I am definitely waiting to see how the car performance on track, but what do you guys think? What is the best design feature of the W14 according to you, and what sort of performance are you expecting from the W14? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section down below. We appreciate you watching our video today. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel and switch on the notifications to be notified of our next video regarding the aerodynamic analysis of the Ferrari SF23.